I was 18, homeless, and standing in the freezing rain with all my worldly possessions, stuffed into a single flimsy plastic trash bag. The orphanage had chewed me up and spat me out the very second the clock struck midnight on my birthday. My parting gift, a yellowed envelope containing the deed to a collapsed, flooded cave in the middle of nowhere. They laughed when they handed it to me, calling it a fitting legacy for a nobody. But what was hidden behind those tons of crushed rock didn't just save my life. It completely destroyed the powerful people who tried to bury me. The smell of industrial bleach and boiled cabbage is something you never truly wash out of your clothes. It gets into your paws. For 12 years, that scent was my entire world at the St. Jude Home for Boys. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I didn't know much about my parents, only that they died in a car crash when I was 6, leaving me to the cold embrace of the state foster system. I spent my life keeping my head down, avoiding the older bullies and counting the days until my 18th birthday. I thought freedom would feel like sunshine. Instead, it felt like a door slamming in my face. It was exactly 12:01 a.m. on a miserable Tuesday in November when Mrs. Beatrice Gable, the facility director, knocked on my dormitory door. Mrs. Gable was a woman made entirely of sharp angles and bitter resentments. She didn't offer a cake. She didn't offer a handshake. She handed me a 30-gallon black garbage bag. "Pack it up, Pendleton," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "State funding officially cut off a minute ago. You're a man now. You can't be taking up a bed meant for a child." "It's freezing outside, Mrs. Gable," I pleaded, shivering in my thin pajamas. "Can I just sleep on the floor until morning? Just until the sun comes up?" "Rules are rules, Arthur," she replied, tapping her clipboard with a manicured fingernail. "However, a man dropped this off for you yesterday. Said it was legal business regarding your family." She tossed a thick manila envelope onto my stripped mattress. It landed with a heavy, dusty thud. I stared at it. Family? I hadn't heard that word in over a decade. I scrambled to throw my 3 t-shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, and a battered pair of sneakers into the trash bag. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter on thick letterhead from the law offices of Theodore Higgins, ESQ, requesting my immediate presence regarding the estate of Silas Pendleton. "Who is Silas Pendleton?" I asked, looking up. Mrs. Gable smirked, a cruel, tight-lipped expression. "Your grandfather, the town crazy. He died a few months ago in a state facility. It seems he left you his empire." She let out a dry, hacking laugh. "Don't get your hopes up, boy. Now out." 10 minutes later, I was standing on the curb in the freezing rain. The heavy iron gates of St. Jude's clicked shut behind me. I had $0 in my pocket, nowhere to go, and an appointment with a lawyer at 900 a.m. I spent the next 8 hours huddled inside a 24-hour laundromat, nursing a discarded cup of lukewarm water, staring at the letterhead, and praying that my grandfather had left me enough money to at least buy a hot meal. The office of Theodore Higgins was wedged between a failing porn shop and a rundown diner. The lawyer himself was a sweated, disorganized man in a cheap, rumpled suit. His desk was an absolute disaster zone of towering paper stacks and half-empty coffee cups. "Ah, Arthur," Higgins wheezed, wiping his brow with a handkerchief as I stood dripping wet in his doorway. "Take a seat. Try not to soak the upholstery." I sat on the edge of a leather chair that had seen better days. "Mr. Higgins, the letter mentioned an estate. Did my grandfather leave me any money?" I was desperate. My stomach was cramping from hunger. Higgins sighed deeply, avoiding my eyes. He pulled a yellowed water-stained deed from the chaos of his desk. "Arthur, I need to manage your expectations. Your grandfather Silas wasn't a wealthy man. In fact, he owed the county quite a bit in back taxes. He was a bit eccentric, paranoid. He believed the government and big corporations were out to steal his life's work, so there's no money. My heart plummeted into my shoes. None, Higgins confirmed gently. What he did leave you, however, is a piece of property, 3 acres up on Blackwood Ridge. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. Land. I own land. I could sell it. Higgins winced. You could try, but you need to understand what this land is. It's essentially a sheer cliff face, unbuildable, no access to county water or power. And the only notable feature on the property is Hollow Creek Cave. A collapsed cave, Higgins corrected. There was a massive rock slide back in 1988. Sealed the entrance completely under thousands of tons of limestone. It's a worthless pile of rubble, Arthur. The county assesses the total value of the property at practically zero. The spark of hope died, replaced by a suffocating wave of despair. It was a cruel joke. I was homeless, starving, and now the proud owner of a pile of rocks. Just then the office door swung open. A man walked in, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a gleaming silver Rolex, and an arrogant smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Thoder," the man said smoothly, ignoring me completely. "Tell me you have the boy here to sign the papers." Higgins looked nervously between us. "Arthur, this is Richard Sterling. He's a real estate developer in town." Sterling finally looked at me, his eyes raking over my wet thrift store clothes and my garbage bag of belongings. His lip curled in faint disgust. "Look, kid, you're in a tough spot. I know you aged out of St. Jude's last night. I know you have nothing. That useless rock pile your crazy grandfather left you is a liability. You owe back taxes on it starting tomorrow." I gripped the arms of the chair. "What do you want?" "I'm building a luxury golf resort on the other side of Blackwood Ridge," Sterling said smoothly. "I need cheap gravel for the foundation of the access roads. I'll take that useless hill off your hands, dynamite the rocks, and save you from the tax burden. I brought a check for $500. Cash it right now. Go buy yourself a hot meal and a bus ticket out of this town." He slapped a crisp certified check on the desk, $500. To me, in that exact moment, it looked like $1,000,000. It was food, a motel room, a chance to breathe. I reached my hand out toward the pen Higgins was offering. But as my fingers brushed the plastic, I stopped. I looked at the deed. Silas Pendleton, the grandfather I never knew, the man everyone called crazy. If this land was so worthless, why was a millionaire developer tracking me down at a dingy lawyer's office less than 10 hours after I was kicked out of the orphanage? Why did Sterling seem so eager, so impatient to get my signature? A gut instinct honed by years of surviving the foster system screamed at me. When someone bigger and richer than you wants something you have, it's never to do you a favor. I pulled my hand back. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. Sterling's arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure venomous rage. "Excuse me. I'm not selling," I said, grabbing the deed and shoving it into my pocket. "It's my grandfather's land. It's mine. I want to see it." "You little fool," Sterling spat, stepping towards me. "You'll starve to death out there. You'll be begging me to buy it by tomorrow, and the price goes down to $100. I didn't answer. I grabbed my garbage bag, pushed past him, and walked out into the rain. I was going to Blackwood Ridge. Blackwood Ridge was 8 miles outside of town. I walked the entire way. The rain hadn't stopped. It had only intensified into a torrential downpour, turning the shoulders of the highway into slick, treacherous mud pits. Cars blew past me, splashing freezing gray water onto my jeans. By the time I reached the dirt service road leading up to my newly inherited property, my boots were waterlogged, my teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I was running purely on adrenaline and spite. The hike up the ridge was agonizing. The terrain was incredibly steep, choked with thorny blackberry bushes and decaying fallen pines. Higgins was right. This wasn't land you could build a house on. It was an aggressive, hostile piece of wilderness. It took me 3 hours to find the coordinates marked on the county map. When I finally broke through the treant, I stopped dead in my tracks, my chest heaving. There it was, Hollow Creek Cave, or rather where the cave used to be. Before me stood a massive, imposing wall of jagged gray limestone boulders, some the size of minivans. It looked as though half the mountain had sheared off and crashed down into the valley, completely burying whatever opening had once been there. Thick, thorny vines crawled over the rocks, making it look like an ancient, forgotten tomb. I dropped my garbage bag into the mud. I walked up to the colossal wall of rock and placed my frozen hands against the wet stone. It was solid, immovable. The reality of my situation crashed down on me harder than the rain. I had turned down $500 for this. Sterling was right. I was a fool, an absolute utter idiot. I had let my pride and paranoia blind me. I had traded a warm bed and a hot meal for a pile of rubble that I couldn't even shelter under. "Grandpa," I whispered into the howling wind, tears mixing with the rain on my face. "What were you thinking? Why did you leave me this?" I screamed in frustration, kicking a loose rock, instantly regretting it as pain shot up my freezing toe. Exhaustion finally overtook me. I was shivering violently, the early stages of hypothermia setting in. The sun was going down and the temperature was dropping fast. I needed shelter immediately, or I wasn't going to survive the night. Frantically, I searched the perimeter of the rockfall. On the far left side, where the avalanche of boulders met the sheer cliff face of the mountain, I spotted a slight overhang. It wasn't much, just a shallow indentation in the rock wall, heavily shielded by a curtain of thick, dead ivy, but the dirt beneath it looked relatively dry. I dragged my bag over, huddled my knees to my chest, and pressed my back against the cold stone, trying to conserve whatever body heat I had left. The storm raged on, thunder shaking the very ground beneath me. Around 2:00 a.m., the disaster happened. The torrential rain had saturated the earth above the overhang. I woke up to a terrifying, deep rumbling sound. It sounded like a freight train was coming through the mountain. The ground vibrated violently. Mudslide. I scrambled to my feet, panicking in the pitch blackness. I tried to run out from under the overhang, but my foot caught on a thick root. I fell backward, slamming hard against the rock face behind me, except the rock face gave way. Instead of hitting solid limestone, I crashed backward through a dense, rotten layer of vines and loose shale. I tumbled head over heels, sliding down a steep, slick chute of darkness. Mud and debris rained down on top of me as I plunged deeper and deeper, screaming until my lungs burned. I hit the bottom with a bone-jarring thud. The wind knocked completely out of me. I lay there in the absolute suffocating blackness, gasping for air, waiting for the mountain to crush me. But the rumbling stopped. The sound of the rain was suddenly muffled, distant. As my breathing slowed, my senses began to adjust. I realized I wasn't wet anymore. The air around me was bone dry, cool, and perfectly still. I ran my hands over the floor. It wasn't dirt or mud. It was smooth, poured concrete. And the smell, it wasn't the smell of a damp, natural cave. The air was faintly laced with the unmistakable scent of old canvas, aged leather, and motor oil. My hands trembled as I reached into my soaked pocket and pulled out the cheap plastic lighter I used to seal frayed threads on my clothes. I flicked the flint once, twice. On the third try, a tiny yellow flame sprang to life, pushing back the absolute darkness. I held the lighter up, illuminating the space around me. My jaw dropped, and the lighter nearly slipped from my fingers. This wasn't a collapsed natural cave. I had fallen through a secondary ventilation shaft into an enormous, reinforced subterranean chamber. And as the flickering light caught the glint of polished chrome and the stark white lettering of dozens of metal filing cabinets, I realized my crazy grandfather hadn't left me a worthless pile of rocks. He had left me a fortress. The flame of my cheap plastic lighter cast long, dancing shadows against the curved concrete walls. The air down here was thick, holding a silence so absolute it made my ears ring. I was no longer in a cave. I was standing inside a heavily reinforced Cold War-era subterranean bunker. I took a tentative step forward, my waterlogged boots squeaking against the smooth floor. As my eyes adjusted, the dim yellow light caught the glint of a heavy metal cylinder resting on a nearby workbench. I shuffled over, my frozen fingers wrapping around the cold, knurled aluminum of a heavy-duty Magite flashlight. I pressed the rubber button. Miraculously, a brilliant, piercing beam of white light cut through the darkness. The true scale of my grandfather's secret hit me like a physical blow. The chamber was roughly the size of a high school gymnasium. The walls were lined with heavy steel shelving, bowing under the weight of hundreds of sealed plastic storage bins, military surplus MREs, and cases of bottled water. But this wasn't just a doomsday prepper's stash. In the center of the room sat two massive objects draped in thick dust-covered canvas tarps. To the far right, an industrial Caterpillar diesel generator hummed faintly, smelling of old grease and dormant power. I walked over to the generator. Instructions were taped to the control panel in neat, blocky handwriting. Silas. My hands shook as I followed his steps, primed the fuel line, turned the heavy brass key, and pulled the starter lever. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life with a deafening mechanical growl. Fluorescent shop lights mounted to the reinforced ceiling flickered violently before blazing into a blinding, steady white glare. I shielded my eyes, and when I lowered my hand, my breath caught in my throat. I walked to the first tarp in the center of the room and pulled it back. Dust billowed into the air, revealing the gleaming cherry red paint and polished chrome of a pristine 1967 Shelby GT 500. It looked like it had rolled off the assembly line yesterday. Even to an 18-year-old kid who had never owned a bicycle, I knew I was looking at a machine worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I pulled the second tarp. Beneath it were 6 heavy olive drab military footlockers. The padlock on the first one was unlatched. I flipped it open, and the sight inside made my knees buckle. It was packed to the brim with gleaming silver, neatly stacked rows of Johnson Matthey 100 silver bars. The next trunk held stacks of gold Krugerrand coins and bundles of pre-$1 990 bills perfectly preserved in vacuum-sealed bags. "Grandpa," I whispered, the word echoing in the cavernous space. "You were rich, but why? Why hide it? Why let the world and me think he was a penniless lunatic who died in a state ward?" The answer was sitting on a sturdy oak desk in the corner of the room. Beside an antique Underwood typewriter sat a thick leather-bound ledger. On top of the ledger was a sealed white envelope. Written across the front in that same blocky handwriting was my name, Arthur. I tore it open. The letter inside was dated exactly 10 years ago. "Arthur, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. You have turned 18 and you possess the stubbornness to keep this land. I am sorry for the life you had to live. I am sorry I could not be there to raise you, but if I had taken you in, they would have killed you, just like they killed your parents. The town thinks I'm crazy. That was my armor. It kept them from looking too closely at this mountain. For 20 years, I was the chief chemical engineer for Vanguard Industries, owned by Richard Sterling's father, Thomas. We manufactured industrial solvents. In 1985, I discovered that Vanguard was illegally dumping thousands of gallons of toxic benzene and trichloroethylene directly into the county's underground aquifer to avoid disposal costs. That water fed the east side of town, the side where your parents lived, the side where the cancer cluster spiked in the late 90s. Your parents didn't die in a random car crash, Arthur. They were leading a class action lawsuit. Their brakes were cut. I stole the original dumping manifests, the internal memos, and the geological surveys. The proof is in the ledger on this desk. I liquidated my assets, bought this decommissioned military bunker, and triggered a rock slide with dynamite to seal the entrance. Sterling has been hunting for this evidence for decades. If Richard Sterling is trying to buy this land from you, it means he knows the evidence is still here, and he wants to bury it permanently under a concrete resort foundation. The wealth in this room is yours. The car, the silver, the gold, but the ledger is your weapon. Avenge your parents, Arthur. Burn the Sterling Empire to the ground. Love, grandfather. A single tear slipped from my chin and splashed onto the yellowed page in my hands, bleeding the ink into a shapeless blur. I didn't bother wiping it away. The ache that had lived in my chest for as long as I could remember. The hollow, vacant space where family was supposed to exist collapsed inward and ignited into something else entirely. Rage, not hot and wild, but dense and suffocating, like molten iron poured directly into my lungs. Richard Sterling's face burned behind my eyes, the polished smile, the Rolex glinting smugly at his wrist, the way he'd flicked a $500 check at me like he was tipping a valet. All of it sat atop a truth so vile it made my hands shake. His fortune was built on the poisoned ground where my parents were buried, not metaphorically, literally. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had erased me, and in doing so they had made a catastrophic mistake. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep was impossible when my blood felt electrified, when every nerve ending hummed with purpose. The bunker felt smaller now, not like a tomb, but like the command center of a war I had never asked to fight, but was suddenly prepared to win. I moved through the rooms methodically, forcing myself to slow down, to absorb everything my grandfather had left behind. His records were obsessively detailed, the work of a man who knew he would not live to see justice, but refused to let the truth die with him. The ledger was the heart of it all. Page after page of cold, precise documentation, dates, GPS coordinates, chemical compositions, shipping manifests. Each illegal dump site mapped and cross-referenced. Each authorization signed in unmistakable ink by Thomas and Richard Sterling. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't conspiracy. It was evidence. By dawn, the adrenaline had sharpened into clarity. I checked my watch. 7:00 a.m. The plan had formed not as a burst of inspiration, but as an inevitability. Going to the local police was suicide. Sterling owned Oak Creek in everything but name. The mayor attended his charity dinners. The sheriff played golf on his private course. Even Higgins, the sniveling lawyer, had been nothing more than a paid gatekeeper. If I walked into town with that ledger, I wouldn't make it to lunch. I needed distance. I needed visibility. And above all, I needed leverage that Sterling couldn't bury. I found a heavy canvas Filson duffel bag in a storage closet, still stiff with age. I packed it carefully, not rushing, treating every item like a piece of ordnance. The ledger went in first, sealed in plastic. Then my grandfather's letter, 3 of the 100 silver bars. Enough weight to remind me this was real. Finally, a vacuum-sealed brick of $100 bills, 10,000 exactly. Emergency oxygen. The next problem was escape. The main blast doors were useless, entombed forever behind the 1988 rock slide. I traced my steps back to the collapsed ventilation chute, the same vertical scar I had fallen through hours earlier. In the maintenance supplies, I found a steel pry bar and a coil of climbing rope, frayed but intact. I wedged the bar into a narrow crack, tied the rope off, and tested the anchor twice. The climb was brutal. Mud slicked the walls. My arms screamed in protest. The duffel dragged like an anchor, threatening to pull me backward into the dark. More than once my boots slipped and my heart slammed into my throat, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every inch upward felt like clawing my way out of the grave they dug for me. When I finally broke through the surface, I collapsed onto wet pine needles, gasping. The storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the trees in blinding shafts of gold. I was soaked, filthy, shaking from exhaustion and cold, and more alive than I had ever been. I didn't go back toward town. Instead, I headed north, deeper into the woods, moving on instinct and stubborn resolve. 6 miles later, I crossed the county line and reached Interstate 89. A long-haul trucker hauling lumber picked me up without asking questions. I told him my car had died. He didn't press. 2 hours later, he dropped me in the heart of the state capitol. Glass towers, traffic noise, anonymity 100 miles from Sterling's reach. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the duffel heavy on my shoulder, the truth heavier still. They had tried to bury me. Instead, they had armed me. And now the reckoning had finally begun. My first stop was a high-end porn shop on the edge of the financial district. The broker, a skeptical man in a tailored vest, raised his eyebrows at the sight of a mud-caked kid dragging a heavy canvas bag. "I need to liquidate this," I said, unzipping the bag and slamming a heavy, tarnished 100 Johnson Matthew silver bar onto the glass counter. His eyes widened. He tested it, weighed it, and 20 minutes later, I walked out with $2,400 in crisp cash. Combined with the old bills from the bunker, I had a war chest. Next, I found a budget motel, paid for 3 nights in cash, and spent an hour standing under a scalding shower, watching 12 years of orphanage grime and Blackwood Ridge mud wash down the drain. I threw my ruined, wet clothes in the trash. I walked to a nearby department store and bought dark-fitted jeans, a crisp white button-down shirt, a dark navy jacket, and a solid pair of leather boots. I went to a barber and had my shaggy, unkempt hair cut short and sharp. When I looked in the mirror, the frightened, homeless orphan from St. Jude's was gone. Staring back at me was Silas Pendleton's grandson. I bought a prepaid Motorola phone from a convenience store and sat on the edge of my motel bed. I opened the yellow pages and flipped to the legal section. I wasn't looking for a small-town ambulance chaser. I was looking for apex predators. My finger stopped on a full-page ad. Vanguard and Hayes, Environmental and Corporate Litigation. I dialed the number. A polished receptionist answered. "Vanguard and Hayes, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak to a senior partner," I said, my voice steady. "Preferably someone who handles corporate malfeasance. I'm sorry, sir. Our partners require appointments." "What is this regarding?" "Tell them it's regarding Vanguard Industries, the Sterling family, and 40,000 gallons of undocumented toxic waste in a municipal aquifer," I said coldly. "Tell them I have the original signed manifests, and tell them if they don't put a partner on the phone in 30 seconds, I'm calling the New York Times." The line went dead silent. I heard a click and hold music played for exactly 12 seconds. When the line picked up again, it wasn't the receptionist. It was a woman's voice, sharp, authoritative, and utterly devoid of patience. "This is Catherine Cole, senior litigation partner," she said. "I highly advise you not to make baseless threats against powerful corporations on recorded lines, kid. Who are you?" "My name is Arthur Pendleton," I replied, "and I have the Sterling ledger." "I want to hire you." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Where are you, Mr. Pendleton?" "Close," I said. "Are you ready to ruin a billionaire?" The law offices of Vanguard and Hayes did not belong to the world I had just crawled out of. They occupied the top 3 floors of a shimmering monolithic glass skyscraper in the absolute center of the capital's financial district. As I walked through the revolving doors, the chaotic noise of the city street was instantly muted, replaced by the hushed, intimidating hum of extreme wealth. The lobby was an expanse of polished Italian marble and brushed steel. I caught my reflection in a dark pane of glass, the dark-fitted jeans, the crisp white button-down, the tailored navy jacket. It was a costume. I still felt like the freezing, starving kid from the St. Jude home for boys. My knuckles were white where my hand gripped the handles of the canvas Filson duffel bag. Inside that bag was the explosive legacy of a man everyone thought was a lunatic. I took a deep breath, forced my shoulders back, and walked toward the sprawling semicircular reception desk. The security guards tracked my every movement. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a headset, looked up with a practiced hollow smile. "I have a meeting," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Arthur Pendleton, I'm here to see Catherine Cole." The receptionist typed something into a terminal, her manicured nails clicking sharply. "Ah, yes, Mr. Pendleton. Please take the private elevator on your left to the 52nd floor. A paralegal will meet you there." The elevator ride made my stomach drop, silently rocketing up 100 floors in seconds. When the doors slid open, I was ushered into a massive corner conference room that offered a dizzying panoramic view of the city skyline. The walls were paneled in rich, dark mahogany lined with heavy legal texts and framed degrees from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. At the center of the room sat a massive glass conference table. I didn't have to wait long. The heavy double doors swung open and Catherine Cole walked in. She was a force of nature, radiating an aura of absolute authority. In her late 40s, dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, she had piercing blue eyes that evaluated and categorized everything they rested on. She didn't look like a lawyer. She looked like an apex predator in a boardroom. Close behind her was a rugged, broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed beard carrying a thick leather briefcase. "Mr. Pendleton," Catherine said, not offering her hand. She took a seat at the head of the glass table, gesturing for the man beside her to sit. "I am Catherine Cole. This is Fiona Harrison, our chief environmental consultant and former lead investigator for the EPA. You made quite the dramatic phone call this morning." "I meant every word of it," I said, remaining standing. Catherine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Her gaze was incredibly heavy. "Let me be frank, Arthur. I bill at $800 an hour. I took this meeting because you invoked the name of a billion-dollar real estate developer and claimed to have proof of a municipal water poisoning. Usually when people walk into this office with claims like that, they're either deeply delusional or they are looking for me to help them extort a settlement. I don't do either. So before I call security, tell me exactly what you think you have." I didn't argue. I didn't try to convince her with words. I simply hoisted the heavy canvas duffel bag onto the pristine glass table. The heavy thump echoed in the quiet room. I unzipped the heavy brass zipper. First, I reached in and pulled out one of the tarnished heavy silver bars, placing it on the table. Next, I pulled out the vacuum-sealed brick of pristine pre-1990 bills. Finally, I reached in with both hands and carefully withdrew my grandfather's thick leather-bound ledger. I placed it perfectly in the center of the table. Fiona Harrison leaned forward immediately, the cynical boredom vanishing from his face. He picked up the heavy silver ingot, turning it over in his hands. "Johnson Matthew," Fiona murmured, his brow furrowing. "This is a vintage 100 paw. It hasn't been in circulation for decades. And these bills," he tapped the plastic wrapping of the cash. "They're uncirculated series from the mid-'80s. Kid, where on earth did you get this?" "My grandfather," I said, finally taking a seat across from them. "His name was Silas Pendleton. He was the chief chemical engineer for Vanguard Industries from 1968 until 1988. Catherine's eyes darted from the silver to my face. Her demeanor shifted instantly. The arrogant skepticism evaporated, replaced by the sharp, terrifying focus of a seasoned litigator smelling blood in the water. She reached out, pulled the ledger toward her, and opened the heavy cover. For the next 45 minutes, the only sounds in that massive room were the ticking of a grandfather clock, the crisp turning of yellowed pages, and the occasional sharp intake of breath from Fiona Harrison as he read over Catherine's shoulder. "My God," Fiona whispered, his finger tracing a complex chemical diagram on one of the pages. "Catherine, look at this. These aren't just notes. These are the original trucking manifests. He has the exact geological coordinates of the illegal dump sites. He mapped the bedrock. Explain it to me," Catherine ordered, not taking her eyes off the page. Fiona looked up, his face pale. Vanguard Industries manufactured industrial solvents, disposing of the toxic byproducts, specifically benzene and trichloroethylene, is incredibly expensive. It requires specialized incineration or deep well injection at federally regulated sites. According to Silas's ledger, Thomas Sterling bypassed all of that. He ordered his trucks to dump tens of thousands of gallons of raw chemical waste directly into a defunct limestone quarry on the edge of town. "The Blackwood Ridge site," I interjected. Fiona nodded grimly. "Exactly, but the bedrock there is porous. It's a cast landscape. The chemicals didn't just sit in the dirt. They seep straight down through the limestone and directly into the primary underground aquifer, the aquifer that fed the entire east side of the municipality." "The cancer cluster," Catherine said quietly, looking up at me. "Yes," I said, feeling the familiar suffocating tightness in my chest. "It spiked in the late 90s. It killed hundreds of people. It killed my parents. They were leading a class-action lawsuit against Vanguard when their car mysteriously lost its brakes on a mountain road." Catherine closed the ledger. She took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. When she looked at me, there was a profound shift in her expression. It was a look of cold, calculated fury. "Arthur, what you have brought me is a nuclear bomb," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This goes far beyond corporate negligence. This is criminal conspiracy, environmental terrorism, and quite frankly, mass manslaughter. The class action damages alone would completely dismantle Vanguard Industries and liquidate the Sterling family trust." "I don't just want their money," I said, gripping the edge of the glass table. "Richard Sterling tracked me down 12 hours after I aged out of my orphanage. He offered me $500 for the land where this bunker was hidden. He wants to pave over it with a luxury golf resort to permanently seal the soil and destroy the evidence. I want him in handcuffs. I want him to lose his freedom just like he took my family's future." The room fell silent again. Catherine and Fiona exchanged a heavy, troubled look. "There is a massive complication," Catherine warned, tapping her gold pen against the glass. "The legal system is a machine, Arthur, and it operates strictly on rules, not just righteousness. The original dumping happened over 30 years ago. The statute of limitations on the vast majority of these environmental crimes and the corporate fraud has long since expired." "But the proof is right there," I argued, pointing at the ledger. "Proof of a past crime." "Yes," Fiona said softly, "but Thomas Sterling, the man who signed these orders, is dead. Richard's defense attorneys will build an impenetrable wall of plausible deniability. They will claim Richard had absolutely no knowledge of his father's actions. They will claim your grandfather forged this ledger. They will tie us up in appellate courts for a decade until you run out of money." A wave of crushing despair washed over me. I had survived the orphanage. I had survived the freezing rain on the mountain. I had found the holy grail of evidence only to be defeated by a calendar. So what do? We just let him get away with it because he hid it long enough. "No," Catherine said, a sharp predatory smile slowly spreading across her face. "We don't go after him for the crimes of his father in the past. We go after him for his own crimes in the present." I frowned, confused. What crimes? The cover-up, Fiona interjected, catching her drift. His eyes lit up. If Richard Sterling is actively trying to defraud you of your land right now, specifically to hide a felony and bury evidence, that is an ongoing criminal conspiracy. It's wire fraud. It's extortion. It's obstruction of justice. Exactly. Catherine agreed, standing up and beginning to pace the length of the room. We can't prove he knew about the dumping 30 years ago. But if we can prove he knows about it today, and he is taking illegal coercive actions to silence you and destroy the site, we don't need the EPA. We need the FBI. How do we prove what's in his head? I asked. We bait the trap, Catherine said, stopping at the window and looking out over the city. You play the desperate, starving orphan one last time. You call his lawyer. You tell them you're freezing, you're hungry, and you've broken down. You tell them you'll take the miserable $500. But you insist they meet you at the property to sign the papers. You make Richard come to the mountain. And then I asked, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. And then Catherine turned to face me. We make sure he talks. We need him to gloat. We need him to admit on tape that he knows exactly what is buried under that rock slide. We push him until he crosses the line from a sleazy real estate deal into outright undeniable extortion. Fiona reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy black secure satellite phone. I still have a lot of friends at the Bureau from my EPA days. Specifically, a special agent named Michael Donovan, who runs the white-collar organized crime division out of the regional field office. He's been trying to nail the Stirlings to a wall for 5 years. Call him, Catherine ordered. She looked back at me, her blue eyes blazing with a terrifying, thrilling intensity. We are going to wire you, Arthur. We are going to put a tactical team in those woods. But when you are standing face to face with Richard Sterling, you will be alone. You have to be the one to push his buttons. You have to make him confess. If you fail, if he walks away without saying the right words, he paves over the mountain and he wins. I looked at the ledger, its leather worn smooth by my grandfather's hands. I looked at the silver bar, a symbol of a man who sacrificed his sanity and his life to build a weapon for a grandson he couldn't even raise. I thought about the smell of industrial bleach had sent Jude's and the arrogant sneer on Richard Sterling's face when he tossed that check at me. Set it up, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I'll give you your confession. Let's ruin him. The rain had returned to Blackwood Ridge, turning the air into a freezing, miserable mist. I stood at the base of the massive rock slide that hid my grandfather's bunker, wearing my old damp clothes over the state-of-the-art federal wire taped securely to my chest. Hidden in the dense tree above me, completely camouflaged in the wet brush, were Special Agent Michael Donovan of the FBI, Fiona Harrison, and a heavily armed tactical team. Catherine Cole was listening in from a command van parked 3 mi down the highway. I was completely alone in the clearing, shivering, partly from the cold, but mostly from the adrenaline tearing through my veins. The crunch of heavy tires on gravel broke the silence. A sleek black Range Rover crawled up the treacherous dirt path, its headlights cutting through the gray fog. It parked a few yards away, and 3 men stepped out into the mud. First was Theodore Higgins, the sweaty lawyer, clutching a waterproof briefcase to his chest like a shield. Next came a massive, thick-necked man in a tight leather jacket. Muscle. Finally, Richard Sterling stepped out. He was wearing an expensive cashmere overcoat, holding a large golf umbrella, looking at the muddy terrain with absolute disgust. "Pendleton," Sterling called out, his voice dripping with condescension as he approached the rock wall. "I see reality finally set in. I told you that you wouldn't last 2 days out here. You look half dead." "I'm cold, Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice shaky, playing the part perfectly. "I haven't eaten since I left the orphanage. I'll sign the deed." "Just give me the check." Sterling chuckled, a dark, cruel sound. He snapped his fingers and Higgins scrambled forward, pulling a legal document from his briefcase. He handed it to me along with a pen. "Sign on the dotted line, kid," Sterling said. "And because you made me drive all the way out to this miserable pile of dirt in the rain, the price has dropped. I'm giving you $200. Take it or leave it." I looked down at the paper. Then I looked up at Sterling, dropping the trembling orphan act completely. I stood up straight, my voice dropping the manufactured quiver. $200 seems a little cheap for a toxic waste dump, Richard, I said smoothly. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the patter of rain against Sterling's umbrella. The smug smile froze on his face, then slowly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, calculating shock. "What did you just say?" Sterling whispered. I said I took a step forward. "It's pretty cheap for the Vanguard Industries benzene and trichloroethylene dump site. The one that poisoned the town's aquifer. The one that killed my parents." Higgins let out a pathetic squeak and took a step back. The thick-necked bodyguard cracked his knuckles, looking at Sterling for an order. "You don't know what you're talking about, you little street rat," Sterling hissed, his composure cracking. "Your grandfather was a lunatic. There's nothing here but rocks." "Then why are you here, Richard?" I challenged. "If it's just rocks, why the rush? I'll tell you why. Because my grandfather didn't just leave me this land. He left me his bunker. I found it. I found the ledger. I found the signatures you and your father put on the dumping manifests. I know everything." Sterling's face turned the color of chalk. His eyes darted wildly around the empty clearing. He realized in that split second that his entire empire, his freedom, his legacy, it was all hanging by a thread held by an 18-year-old kid he had dismissed as garbage. The mask of the civilized businessman completely fell away, revealing the monster underneath. "Griggs!" Sterling barked at his bodyguard, his voice trembling with homicidal rage. "Break his legs, throw him down the ravine, then forge his signature on that damn deed. No one is going to miss a homeless orphan. I'm not losing my company because of a dead old man and a snot-nosed kid. Did you get that, Agent Donovan?" I said clearly, staring directly into Sterling's eyes. Sterling froze. "Who are you talking to? FBI, nobody move." The train exploded. It was like magic. 1 second the woods were empty. The next, a dozen federal agents in tactical gear with laser sights aimed directly at Sterling's chest swarmed down the muddy embankment. "Hands where we can see them. Drop the umbrella. Get on the ground." Agent Donovan roared, racking the slide of his rifle. Griggs, the bodyguard, immediately dropped to his knees, throwing his hands in the air. Higgins dropped his briefcase and began sobbing hysterically into the mud, screaming, "I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. He made me do it." Richard Sterling stood paralyzed, the expensive golf umbrella slipping from his fingers and tumbling into the mud. He looked at the laser sights painting his cashmere coat. Then he looked at me. The absolute terror in his eyes was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. As Agent Donovan slammed Sterling face first against the hood of the Range Rover and locked the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists, Sterling locked eyes with me. "You're nothing." Sterling screamed, his voice cracking as the agents dragged him away. "You're nobody. You're a piece of trash from St. Jude." I walked up to him, the rain washing the last bits of mud from my face. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," I said quietly, ensuring he heard every word, "and I just bought your town." The fallout was biblical. The ledger provided by Catherine Cole triggered a massive federal investigation. Vanguard Industries was immediately shut down by the EPA. Richard Sterling was indicted on 47 counts of environmental fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The ensuing class action lawsuit representing the families on the east side of town completely liquidated the Sterling family fortune. I didn't keep the land on Blackwood Ridge as a secret bunker. Working with Fiona Harrison, I used the wealth my grandfather left me, the gold, the silver, and the millions I eventually won in the Vanguard settlement, to safely excavate the cave and begin a massive environmental cleanup of the aquifer. My first real estate purchase wasn't a mansion or a sports car. I bought the St. Jude home for boys. I fired Mrs. Beatrice Gable on the spot, completely renovated the facility, and turned it into a state-of-the-art academy and safe haven for foster kids, fully funded by the Pendleton Foundation. They told me I had inherited a worthless pile of rocks. They told me I was a nobody with no future. But beneath the dirt and the darkness, my grandfather had buried the truth. He had buried a weapon, and when the time came, I didn't just use it to save myself. I used it to change the world. Life rarely deals you a fair hand. But Arthur's story proves that true value is often hidden beneath the surface. He went from a discarded, homeless orphan shivering in the rain to a man who possessed the courage and the means to topple a corrupt empire. It's a powerful reminder that the things society labels as worthless, whether it's an abandoned piece of land or an overlooked individual, often hold the greatest power to create profound change. We all have a legacy waiting to be unearthed. Sometimes you just have to dig through the mud to find it. If Arthur's incredible journey of resilience, justice, and uncovering hidden truth resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never give up. Don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable real-life stories of people fighting back against the odds.